country legend Stringbean Akeman and his wife were murdered in their home back in 1973.
For decades, one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in American country music history loomed over Nashville and the rural South. The brutal 1973 murder of Stringbean, the beloved banjo player and comedian from the Grand Ole Opry. Known offstage as David Stringbean Akeman, his distinctive tall frame, old-time attire, and infectious humor made him a household name. He was a staple on Hee Haw and adored by fans for his down-home charm and musical prowess. But everything changed on a cold November night when he and his wife, Estelle, were gunned down in their modest Tennessee home. The case stunned the nation, the country music community, and his loyal fan base. And now, at long last, after decades of speculation and silence, the mystery has finally been solved. And the truth is far more chilling than anyone had dared to imagine. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The Akemans lived simply, even modestly, despite Stringbean's fame. They were known for being frugal, distrustful of banks, and deeply private. That frugality may have cost them their lives. Rumors had circulated for years that Stringbean kept large sums of cash hidden inside his cabin. This detail, once dismissed as folk legend, turned out to be central to the shocking truth that has finally come to light. Investigators now confirm that the motive for the crime was rooted not in blind rage or random violence, but in cold, calculated greed, fueled by insider knowledge and a betrayal that came from a place no one had previously considered. Back then, two young men, cousins named John and Marvin, were arrested, tried, and convicted for the killings. But their conviction didn't fully close the case. Whisperings persisted in Nashville that something didn't add up. While Marvin turned to religion in prison and eventually died behind bars, John always maintained a cryptic silence about what had really happened that night. For decades, he refused interviews, rebuffed parole offers that required full disclosure, and left behind only fragments of stories. It wasn't until recently, in the twilight of his life and racked by illness, that he finally agreed to speak. And when he did, the puzzle pieces began to fall into place. Not just about who pulled the trigger, but about why, how, and who helped make it all possible. According to newly released records and a recently unearthed confession, the crime was far more organized than anyone had suspected. The killing wasn't a botched robbery gone wrong as previously believed. It was orchestrated with intent, planned with knowledge only someone close to the Akemans could have known. The bombshell came when John named a third man, a friend of the couple and a fellow musician, who had secretly tipped them off about the supposed stash of cash. This man had performed alongside Stringbean, eaten dinner in his home, and smiled in photographs just days before the killings. And all the while, he was feeding information to the would-be robbers. What makes this revelation so devastating is not just the betrayal, but the precision with which the plan was executed. The Akemans had returned home from the Opry that night, parking their car as usual, unaware that two men were already waiting inside. The killers had broken in earlier, lying in wait in the shadows of a house they had studied carefully. They knew where Stringbean kept his weapons, knew the layout of the house, and even knew Estelle's habits, how she always lingered behind her husband, giving them enough time to confront one and then the other. The confession also revealed a chilling detail. The killers hadn't initially intended to murder anyone. The plan was to intimidate Stringbean, get him to hand over the rumored cash, and leave. But when he reached for his gun, instinctively trying to protect his wife and home, panic set in. What followed was a chaotic exchange of gunfire that left both him and Estelle dead. The tragic irony is that the fabled stash of money wasn't even in the house. It was later discovered years after the murders, hidden inside the walls, untouched, gathering dust. The crime had been for nothing, but the implications of this new information stretch beyond the night of the murder. It forces a reevaluation of trust within tight-knit communities, and casts a shadow over a cherished era in country music history. The idea that someone from within Stringbean's circle, someone welcomed into his home and life, would orchestrate such a betrayal has sent shockwaves through the few surviving members of that world. For many, it tarnishes the memory not of Stringbean himself, who remains a beloved figure, but of the camaraderie that was believed to have existed among his peers. This breakthrough also exposes glaring flaws in the original investigation. Police had long suspected more than two people were involved, but lacked the evidence to pursue it. The confession not only confirmed those suspicions, but named names, some of whom are still alive today. Though legal consequences may no longer be possible due to statutes of limitations or the death of primary actors, the moral reckoning is very real. Families of those implicated are now forced to confront truths long buried, and the legacy of certain performers will never be viewed the same way again. The ripple effects extend to the country music industry, which had for decades mythologized Stringbean as a symbol of simpler times. His tragic death was seen as a grim but isolated act, a terrible story from a more innocent age. But the truth revealed now shows that envy, jealousy, and ambition wormed their way even into the backwoods charm of Nashville's golden years. The idea that someone might have sold out a friend for profit, knowing full well the risk of bloodshed, shatters the illusion of unity that many still cling to. What also emerges from this resolution is a portrait of a man deeply misunderstood. Stringbean, often caricatured as a country bumpkin, was in fact an astute and cautious man. He distrusted banks not out of ignorance, but because he'd grown up during the Great Depression and saw firsthand how institutions could fail ordinary people. His thriftiness, once the subject of backstage jokes, now appears tragically prophetic. He was a man trying to protect himself in a world he no longer fully trusted, and it was precisely that caution that sealed his fate. Investigators now believe the third man, the insider, had been probing Stringbean for months, asking casual questions, observing patterns, and building a dossier for the robbers. His motivations remain a mix of financial desperation and envy. He was a talented musician, but always in Stringbean's shadow, always second tier. The fame and fortune he craved never came, and resentment festered. When the opportunity arose to exploit Stringbean's vulnerability, he took it. Not by pulling the trigger himself, but by guiding the hands of those who would. As for how this confession came to light, it began with a documentary filmmaker who had been piecing together the Stringbean case for years. He had tracked down surviving family members, interviewed former law enforcement, and stumbled upon sealed court documents suggesting there was more to the case than had ever been disclosed. A chance encounter with John, now elderly, frail, and living in a care facility, opened the door. With the cameras off and only a recorder running, John finally let the truth spill out. The filmmaker's persistence became the catalyst for this historic moment of closure. Even so, the resolution raises as many questions as it answers. Why wasn't the third man investigated more thoroughly back then? Why did no one follow up on tips that he had been asking suspicious questions about Stringbean's finances? And perhaps most hauntingly, how many more crimes like this, born of envy and fueled by betrayal, have remained buried under layers of silence? There's also the eerie atmosphere of the Akeman cabin itself, which still stands today. Once a symbol of country innocence, it now feels like a monument to the fragility of trust. Visitors have often spoken of an eerie stillness that lingers in the home, as if the place itself remembers what happened. With the mystery finally resolved, that stillness takes on a new weight. It's no longer just about what was lost, it's about what was concealed, manipulated, and orchestrated. Among musicians who knew Stringbean, the news has caused a surge of emotion. Some have expressed relief that the truth is out. Others have struggled with the names implicated, especially the insider whose role had never been suspected. The country music world is small and relationships run deep. To learn that someone they shared the stage with might have played a part in the Akeman tragedy has shattered long-held assumptions. It's not just the act of murder that wounds, but the years of deception that followed. Even decades later, the shock lingers. This wasn't just a cold case finally solved. It was a story of betrayal at the heart of one of America's most treasured cultural institutions. It showed that the darker aspects of human nature, greed, jealousy, duplicity, can hide even in the most homespun of communities. And it underscored just how thin the line can be between admiration and envy, between friendship and exploitation. What also makes this moment historic is the forensic effort that confirmed parts of John's story. After his confession, cold case investigators reopened evidence boxes long consigned to storage. Forensic advances allowed them to reanalyze fingerprints, hair samples, and even carpet fibers that had once seemed inconsequential. Every detail John described, the position of the furniture, the precise time the Akemans arrived home, the way the gun was stored, checked out. It was like watching an old ghost flicker into view and take on solid form. As strange as it sounds, solving the Stringbean mystery has also brought a renewed interest in his music. Fans, both old and new, have returned to his recordings, now tinged with a bittersweet context. The high, lonesome pluck of his banjo and the warmth in his comedic timing feel heavier now, threaded with the awareness of what he never lived to see. Yet in another sense, his artistry stands even taller. To know what he achieved and how steadfastly he clung to his values, even as danger encroached, lends his legacy a tragic nobility. The implications for true crime research are also profound. This case demonstrates the importance of never closing the door on unsolved mysteries. Time, age, guilt, and persistence can eventually coax the truth to the surface. It affirms the role of independent investigators, documentarians, and journalists who refuse to let the past go dark. Sometimes, justice is not swift, but it is relentless. Now that the mystery is solved, the name Stringbean will forever be linked not just to his music, but to the resilience of a story that demanded the truth be told, no matter how long it took. And what was uncovered wasn't just a criminal conspiracy, but a human tragedy that unraveled under the weight of time, revealing betrayal where there should have been loyalty, darkness where there should have been light. The shock of the Stringbean mystery's resolution will reverberate for years. It is a sobering reminder of how fragile the ties of trust can be and how deeply betrayal can scar even the most joyous of lives. The echoes of that night in 1973 are no longer just whispers in the Tennessee woods. They are now a clear, harrowing story, finely told, brutally honest, and unforgettable. Now that the final threads of the Stringbean mystery have been pulled loose, what emerges from beneath the surface isn't just a story of crime, it's a window into the psychology of envy and the cultural mythology of rural fame. The investigation's final revelations have led many to reevaluate how fame operated in an era before social media, before security systems and publicists, when stars like Stringbean lived relatively unprotected, almost naively, among the very people who watched them on television each week. His murder has always felt larger than life because it shattered the illusion that goodness alone could shield someone from harm. What makes the story so haunting is that Stringbean represented something deeply rooted in the American psyche. A man who made it big but never abandoned his roots. He was the embodiment of old-school values, self-reliant, modest, authentic. His popularity came not from polish or showmanship, but from an earnestness that felt immune to corruption. And yet, it was precisely this authenticity, this refusal to build walls or flaunt his wealth, that left him vulnerable. The final solving of the case doesn't just implicate individuals, it interrogates an entire ethos, one that suggests tight-knit communities are always safe, and that familiarity ensures protection. In reality, it's often the opposite. The clearer your values, the easier you are to exploit by those who don't share them. Stringbean's killers didn't target him randomly. They knew exactly what kind of man he was, how he thought, what he feared, and what he would do in a moment of confrontation. The man who betrayed him had studied him with the care of a friend and the coldness of a predator. And therein lies the real horror, not just the loss of life, but the theft of innocence, the raising of a cultural myth. One of the most harrowing aspects of the newly uncovered details is how meticulously the third man, the informant, staged his deception. This wasn't a crime carried out in drunken rage or born of impulse. This was patient, methodical exploitation. Over time, the insider worked his way into the Akeman's confidence, presenting himself as a kindred spirit. He mirrored their values, praised their lifestyle, reinforced their suspicions of modern institutions, all the while gathering the kind of information that only intimacy could offer. It wasn't just a robbery, it was a manipulation of trust over many months. What's particularly disturbing is that this betrayal didn't simply end with the crime. After the murders, the third man continued to perform, tour, and even memorialize Stringbean publicly. In interviews, he spoke with reverence about his fallen friend, spinning anecdotes that today feel almost grotesque in their hypocrisy. This long con, maintained for years after the crime, reveals a capacity for compartmentalization and deception that few suspected. His mask never slipped, and that makes the unmasking now so deeply disorienting. People who thought they knew him, fellow musicians, fans, family members, have been forced to reconcile two irreconcilable versions of the same man. Another chilling revelation from the recent confession concerns how the crime scene was managed in the immediate aftermath. Several details were omitted from police reports at the time, likely in an effort to shield the Akeman's dignity or to avoid tipping off other potential accomplices. But John's confession finally shed light on elements that had long confused investigators. The strange positioning of the bodies, items that had clearly been moved and then returned to their original places, and the eerie lack of forced entry damage. These were all signs of familiarity, of someone who didn't need to break their way in but could enter with confidence, knowing how to avoid triggering suspicion. One particularly grotesque moment, now corroborated by crime scene evidence, is that the killers stayed inside the house for some time after the murders. Not fleeing immediately, they instead searched for the rumored cash with a kind of desperate quiet. They ransacked Stringbean's modest cabin, cutting into mattresses, pulling back floorboards, prying into crawl spaces. The blood was still fresh, the bodies still cooling. It wasn't a hurried escape, it was a cold, methodical search. And the fact that they found nothing only adds a tragic, almost cinematic cruelty to the story. They had killed for a myth, and when they found nothing, they vanished into the Tennessee dark with nothing but horror in their wake. With the case now solved, historians and cultural critics are beginning to weigh in on its significance beyond the musical world. Forensic psychologists, for example, have noted how rare it is for long-held criminal secrets to unravel so completely, especially when multiple parties are involved and at least one of them goes to their grave. That the truth survived this long, in whispers, in guilt, in inconsistencies, and was finally brought to light, is remarkable. It speaks to the unique interplay of personal conscience, journalistic diligence, and institutional memory. In many cases, the trail goes cold and stays cold, but not here. Sociologists, too, are interested in how the Stringbean case reflects rural America's uneasy relationship with wealth and fame. The Akemans were never ostentatious, but fame has its own gravitational pull. It attracts not just admiration, but resentment. Stringbean's continued financial caution, keeping cash in the home, living below his means, wasn't just a personality quirk. It was his defense against a world he feared was increasingly corrupt. Ironically, it was this very caution that made him a target. It fed the rumors, it created the perception of hidden wealth, and it drew the predators closer. This perception of hidden fortune fueled not only the crime but the myth-making around it afterward. For years, people speculated that the Akemans had stashed hundreds of thousands in their home. Even after the tragedy, treasure hunters would occasionally sneak onto the property, hoping to find something the killers missed. The very house became a symbol of mystery. But what's been uncovered now suggests that the true treasure wasn't in the walls. It was in the man himself, his ethics, his artistry, his simple way of life. That was what was looted the night he died, and that's what can never be returned. The release of the confession has also prompted Tennessee law enforcement to reopen several cold cases from the 1970s. Some detectives believe that the same group may have committed other robberies around that time, now reclassified as potentially connected. With forensic technology vastly improved and new attention on historical crimes, the Stringbean case may just be the first domino to fall in a chain of long overdue revelations. Forensic teams are now re-examining ballistics and fibers from nearby crimes to determine whether the same weapon or perpetrators were involved. If proven, it could reshape the crime landscape of that era. Meanwhile, a new wave of interest has spread to younger audiences unfamiliar with Stringbean's legacy. Digital streaming platforms have seen a spike in plays of his music and episodes of Hee Haw. For them, the story reads like a Southern noir novel come to life, a tale of loyalty, betrayal, and poetic injustice. Filmmakers and podcast creators are already crafting adaptations, eager to present this haunting narrative in serialized form. Yet beneath the intrigue lies something deeper, a genuine desire to understand the man who lived humbly, played joyfully, and died tragically. For the local community where the Akemans lived, the resolution of the mystery has brought a strange mixture of peace and unrest. Some feel vindicated. They always believed the official story didn't tell the full truth. Others are rattled by the resurfacing of old suspicions, particularly those whose families intersected with the key players. A once quiet town is now the center of renewed media attention, and not everyone welcomes the spotlight. Yet even those uncomfortable with the publicity admit that it's better than silence. At least now, the silence isn't laced with lies. It's worth noting that this case has also reignited conversations about justice and the statute of limitations on certain crimes. Because the third man never directly pulled a trigger, and due to the passage of time, no criminal charges may ever be filed against him. For many, this is a painful realization that a man responsible for orchestrating such horror may never see the inside of a courtroom. But others argue that the truth, at last, is its own kind of justice. Being publicly named, publicly shamed, and stripped of the myth he built around himself is a punishment in its own right. And then there's Estelle, too often overshadowed in retellings of the tragedy. She wasn't just a bystander. She was a beloved wife, a fiercely private person, and an integral part of Stringbean's life. The confession revealed how she tried to escape, how she screamed for help, how she fought in those final moments. Her death was just as brutal, just as undeserved, and finally, just as acknowledged. With the case closed, her story has been brought out of the margins and placed alongside her husband's, where it always belonged. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the Stringbean mystery finally being solved after decades? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.